Well, YouTube kicked me in the balls over my positive reviews of The Secret World of Alex Mack, so with a black mark on my record and a 15-minute limit instated, I guess I have no choice but to talk about video games, the only thing you can really get away with on this site. But hey, I was going to talk about them anyway, so whatever. Now, most licensed games tend to be completely ignored by anyone even halfway serious about gaming. They tend to be rushed to match release dates of a film or a show or whatever it is they're spinning off from, and the gameplay isn't usually as important as familiar or bankable iconography. While this certainly applies to the 3 Animorph video games released in 2000, there are some factors that make them kinda unique and interesting among the usual dreck of licensed games. First off, you just don't get too many games based on literature. It's not completely unheard of. Goosebumps had a handful of decent ones in the 90s, but books are not a proper visual medium. When it comes to adapting a pre-existing property, be it a movie or a television show or comic book, game designers can skip the step of designing characters and settings, saving time and money. The easy answer would be to draw from the television show and not the books, and these games kinda do, especially in the cover art, but they never actually commit to it. It seems like they went through both the books and the television show and picked through it like a salad bar. Or, for another food metaphor, none of these games are Animorphs, they are Animorph loafs. Animorph iconography ground up and lumped together and cooked into some kind of game. The other interesting thing about these games is that they were produced by 3 separate companies for 3 different consoles and released within 6 months of each other, as if there was a race to be the first to cash in on Animorphs. And each of these games couldn't be any more different. It's actually kind of cool the different kinds of gameplay these people try to crowbar Animorphs into. So we'll be doing 4 episodes of this series. The first 3 will be looking at each game, and the final one will be looking at all we've learned from these games and construct a theoretical Animorphs video game for today. So let's start with the Game Boy Color outing, simply titled Animorphs. This game is brought to us by Ubisoft and Runny Fun. It's good for kids. Yeah, I have no idea what Runny Fun was supposed to be. This seems to be the only game they're credited with. My best guess is that they were a gaming company still based in a garage that was going to focus on educational kids games, if the tagline's any indication, but Animorphs flopped and they dissolved into the ether. On the other hand, you probably know all about Ubisoft, one of the top 5 independent game publishers in the world. Fairly certain they just whipped up the box art and made no effort to actually improve or sell the game, leaving 6 guys in a basement to do all the work. And that work was to rip off Pokemon, basically. Pokemon is a game about collecting monsters and having them fight each other, and well, the Animorphs kinda collect animals when they acquire their DNA, and they are often in combat situations, so it's not hard to see the thought process here. If you're gonna rip off a game for Animorphs instead of come up with your own gameplay, Pokemon seemed like a decent fit. However, Runny Fun completely dropped the ball on it, leaving out a bunch of the stuff from the original Pokemon games that would have made sense in an Animorphs game, while keeping in things that just don't. Okay, here's how this game works. It's split into 4 missions, each playing with a different Animorph, and it requires you to go around and get morphs. Naturally, the best way to acquire an animal's DNA is to beat the shit out of it. Yes, you have to beat an animal in combat till its HP drops to 0 in order to tame and acquire it. Hey, do you like Pokemon but don't think it supports animal abuse enough? Well, I have the game for you. It's great because the first character you play is Cassie, and there's something amazingly awful seeing her morph a dog to murder a goat. Combat is pretty standard turn-based stuff, but lacks any of the complexities of Pokemon. Each animal has a move set, but there are only 2 kinds of moves, attack moves and defense moves, and very little actual variance. It's like if every Pokemon just knew Tackle and Sand Attack. I mean, certain moves are stronger than others, and specific animals seem to be more effective against specific others, but there's no way to know the combinations except through trial and error, and this game is not good for trial and error. I mean, there's no info sheets on the animals, no real visible stats to speak of. There's an attack called Venom, but it just inflicts damage. It doesn't poison your opponent. There's no status effects at all. There's just no strategy to any of this. You're pretty much stuck to either hitting your opponent with the bigger Animorphs, or using a defense move 1,000 times, then whittling away with smaller morphs. Hey look, my elephant can punch. Didn't know they bred elephants with fists. Here's the first problem with using trial and error in this game. If your Animorph loses all of its HP, it's gone. You can only morph it again if you backtrack to the animal and fight it to the death again. It's like being in a forced Nuzlocke challenge. What sense does that make? What happened to healing with morphing? There are no items you can use in combat. The main way to heal is by battling an enemy. It sometimes drops food that gives you HP for some reason, and that's only like 50% of the time. There are also these giant apple things that'll heal your morphs, but they are few and far between. I mean, jeez, this thing is huge. It looks like something that fell out of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. You can't carry duplicates of a morph, and you can only have 5 morphs at a time. Yeah, Pokemon allows you to carry 6 Pokemon at a time, but this game takes up one of those slots with your human form. Why do they even give your human form HP? They never get hurt, they never get into combat. If you're human when combat starts, the only action you can take is to morph into an animal, and the enemy won't attack you until you're morphed. Would it have been so hard to come up with a way to store morphs? I mean, Pokemon had the PC system, where Pokemon you caught would go if you weren't actively using them. What if the game has something like a morph journal, which kept track of all the animals you acquired, but you could only have a certain number of morphs queued? Still not exactly accurate to the books, but it keeps the challenge of maintaining a limited number of morphs without needing to take long backtracks to find the animal you need for any situation. Heck, while we're fixing things, let's take away the whole losing morphs when you run out of HP thing. What if, when you lost all your HP in Animorph, you died, but everything heals when you morph? To keep things from being too easy, what if instead of having the human form have an HP meter, we change it into a stamina meter, and every time you morph, you lose stamina? It's established in the books that morphing can be stressful, and morphing a lot in a short amount of time can drain your energy quickly. This way, you stay closer to the book and ditch the annoying lose your morph thing while keeping the game challenging. Instead, you pretty much dread every combat you find yourself in, and that's no fun at all. While a lot of the times you see combat with aliens or animals coming, there's some areas where aliens will just suddenly attack you out of nowhere, and you never know where it's going to be. If your morphs are low on health and you're scanning the area hoping to find a giant apple and a Hork-Bajir or Taxon just suddenly pops in, you are fucked. But even ignoring these surprise attacks, thanks to the level design, you still end up in situations where you want to avoid combat but can't. And take this area for example. I know I have an entire base of Yerks to deal with, and I don't want to lose anything in combat till then, but I have these 2 really tough wolves in my way in a very narrow path. The wolves move in a completely random pattern, they move just as fast as you, and for fuck's sake, this is not fun! I understand why you have to fight the Yerks whenever you encounter them. They are the enemies of the game. But why do you have to fight the animals? Even larger predator animals don't just automatically try to kill people if they casually stroll 10 feet away from them. And why are things like bats and mice trying to pick fights with me? Or is it the other way around? Do the Animorphs just have such a hatred for animals that they have no choice but to try and kill them anytime they get within arm's reach? And there is a run option, but it works maybe 2% of the time, and when it does work, you'll have been wailed on too much for it to have been worth it. But you know what? I could look past all of this. I could look past the losing your morph thing that makes the game tedious to manage and clearly shows the game designers knew nothing about how morphing worked in the books or the television show. I could look past the random Yerk battles that could end your game in an instant. I could look past the shitty health management and the poor running options and the lack of any real strategy in combat. But I can't, because the game has no save function. I am not fucking kidding. Instead of a proper save function, this game uses a password system. What the hell? And a proper fuck you password system with 16 digits and random combinations of numbers, lowercase letters, uppercase letters, and random symbols. Passwords are generated once you've completed certain things in your missions, meaning you have to pause the game and bring up the password and then write down the 16 digits. This game came out in December of 2000. That's 3 months before the Game Boy Advance was released, which, unless I'm missing something here, was the last major gaming device to use cartridges. How does this game not have an internal battery and a proper save system? Could Ubisoft, of all people, not afford to shill out? Would it become as much of a basic feature as the ability to turn the game on? A password system? What is this, 1989? And that's really the final nail in the coffin as far as trial and error goes. Without the ability to save when you want to, experimenting in combat is a huge risk. Losing in surprise combat could set you back 20 minutes of gameplay, so you never really want to explore your environments, and I haven't even gotten to the mini-games yet. I weep for the people who tried to play this game in a day before emulators and save states. Of course, combat is not the only way to lose the game. If you morph in front of a person, you've been exposed and it's game over. I guess that makes sense, and at the very least the game has the decency to let you know if you're in line of sight of a person or a yerk before you morph. The logic of that kind falls apart when you're jumped by an alien or you lose a morph in combat and you're forced to morph in front of the alien, or when you're fighting an animal when another person is present. And of course nobody reacts to an elephant running around the alien spaceship or a chimpanzee walking around town. I don't know, it's little things like that that can ruin the immersion for me. Immersion, right? This game looks like it was designed by a 6-year-old in a box of crayons. Everything is hilariously out of proportion, and look, your character doesn't even line up with the doors. Not that you can enter 90% of these buildings. What is this? A sign? A sign? It looks like a trap from the Riddler. Here's the mall. Yep, this looks exactly like a mall. I love how they have these giant doors marked stairs, but you can't use them. Why advertise an area you can't get to? Why not just make it a blank wall? Hey, guess what this is supposed to be? A pet store. One of the very first things you manage to do in the game is to investigate a bunch of animals going crazy at the pet store, and the owner tells you that one of his snakes have escaped. Gee, I wonder if it's because you keep your animals in yellow cubicles without doors. And what mall pet store sells squirrel monkeys and chimpanzees? Chimpanzees with tails, no less. So you find the snake and beat the shit out of it, and then that somehow fixes the problem, even though the snake is still running around the mall unattended. Don't bother talking to anyone in this game. I don't think their hitboxes actually match their physical location, so you spend way too long trying to find that sweet spot, pressing the action button over and over again. And all you get for your trouble is some kind of generic comment about the weather or whatever. You know, not every person was helpful in Pokemon, but at least each person had their own unique bit of dialogue that helped flesh out the world a little bit. And they had to have, what, a couple hundred characters in that game? Here, there's about 30 people to talk to, and it's mostly the same 5 messages.